Understanding this trend is key to identifying high growth opportunities. To shed light on this, we have Mr. Amit Sinha, Fund Manager, Equity at HDFC Asset Management Company, with 19 years of experience in equity research and fund management. Having worked with Macquarie Capital and now HDFC AMC, his deep insights into India's consumption story and investment potential are invaluable. Let's welcome Mr. Amit Sinha to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. This is Amit from HDFC Mutual Fund. This is probably the last session of the day, and I was talking to my colleague, and after multiple sessions, typically, the last session is a difficult session for the speaker, but I'll try to make this time worthy of your kind of investing your half an hour. I'll try to make this worthy for you. So starting with, I think the last speaker also kind of alluded to consumption as a theme, but I think the beauty at this particular juncture is that in the current volatile environment, especially when there are uncertainties and volatilities which are coming both from the domestic market as well as the global policies. This sector stands as a rock solid sector, and there are multiple tailwinds which I believe are going to play out in the next 2 years to 3 years. So I'll start with the presentation. So the presentation is typically structured in a way that the first few minutes. And I promise I'll try to keep it short. The presentation is structured in a way that the first few minutes I'll run you through some of the long-term drivers of consumption and why we believe that India for the next decade or so will be a very high growth consumption economy. And the second half of the presentation is basically the current factors and what has happened in the last few months and 1 year, which is also kind of making the story attractive. And last part, very few minutes I'll take on the fund which we run. So coming to the long-term structural drivers, I think the point number one is clearly the per capita income part, which I think the earlier speaker also alluded to. But typically whenever a country crosses close to around $2,500 mark, there is a significant jump in terms of significant acceleration in terms of consumption, and we are likely to see the same trend over the next 10 years. We have given here the example of China, but China is not the only country which has seen this kind of an acceleration when the per capita income crossed $2,500 mark. But we have also seen a similar kind of trend in Vietnam. We have seen similar kind of trend in Indonesia, where when the country crossed $2,500 mark, there was a significant kind of acceleration in terms of the consumption growth. On the right hand side, if you look at some of the categories in China, some of the consumption categories in China during 2006 to 2012, when they crossed $2,500 and kind of went to $5,000 mark, the categories growth just accelerated during that period. Again, a point which I was trying to kind of refer to. Similarly, in terms of other factors which are tailwind, is India is a young country, demography wise we are pretty young, with a median age of 28, 29. Similarly, the urbanization rate is kind of picking up in a very fast way. In the next 20 years, we are likely to see 50% of the India's urban population. So that's a big theme again. Similarly, if you look at probably this chart is one of the most important chart of the entire presentation. And if you look at the left hand side and the right hand side, I think the difference is that the pyramid, which is basically which is kind of getting inverted in the next 10 years. The reason is that we are seeing a shift of almost close to around 12 crore people above income of $10,000, which is basically around 8.5 lakh rupees on an annual basis. We are seeing that close to around 12 crore people moving into that category in the next 10 years, which is 12 crore household, which is a very big number in our view. And the pyramid shifting is the main reason why we will see a significant premiumization. We are already seeing that, but next 10 years can kind of see an accelerated premiumization because of this factor. I think some of the kind of examples of premiumization again, if you look at some of the categories like detergents, if you look at the categories like paints, etc., they have all seen significant premiumization, and the premium category has actually driven the entire category. Similarly, formalization is a big driver. Again, from an organized company point of view, formalization continues to be a big driver for the large companies. We have seen, even now in India, the unorganized segment, they hold a massive chunk of market share across the segment, whether it is consumer durables or FMCG. The unorganized space still has a high market share, and over a period of time, with some of the formal, basically with the formalization picking pace because of the government policies, we will see the organized companies kind of gaining market share, and that will boost the growth. I think from a access point of view, I think we have the last decade or like last 5 to 10 years have been very good from an access point of view, where digitization has helped the accessibility of both products as well as services across the length and breadth of the country, and that is also leading to some of the disruptive companies kind of coming up, and some of the D2C companies and some of the online companies. Probably the reach which some of these companies are getting these days within the first few years was almost impossible 5 to 10 years back. So I think digitization is playing its own part in kind of both premiumization as well as the penetration story of consumption. I think that was the last slide of some of the structural drivers which we wanted to kind of present. Now the next few slides are mainly talking about why the story is relevant now. So what has happened, and this is honestly this is a fact that the consumption story got derailed in the last 2 years because of multiple reasons, and especially the non-premium part, the mass consumption clearly kind of struggled in the last 2 years, and there were reasons including a very high inflation, which typically kind of impacts the lower per capita income people in the mass end of the consumption kind of struggled in the last 2 years, especially the rural consumption. So now we are seeing, in the last few months, inflation particularly has been, while this is a monitorable, but inflation trend is now kind of becoming benign. Trend is now kind of coming down, which is a very good news for consumption. Similarly, if you look at the private final consumption expenditure part, which is a large part of our GDP, almost close to around 55% of GDP is contributed by private final consumption. I think that has seen growth higher than the overall GDP growth, which was not the case in FY24. I have a chart here in the subsequent slide. Second point is also, if you look at some of the state governments and the kind of welfare spending which has been announced, in some of the large states, including Maharashtra, these are big numbers. All put together, we are talking about 3 lakh crore of welfare spending, which some of these large states have announced, and this is a big kind of a tailwind for especially for the mass consumption going forward. Similarly, last year, rainfall was good, which is typically good for agri-economy and also helps to bring the overall inflation down. And we have seen, some of the data points. If you look at some of the, consumer companies' commentary, they have been talking about rural consumption now kind of picking up. So that is also something which is encouraging. So this is, the private final consumption data. Again, FY24 was weak, but if you look at first half of FY25, that number has picked up. Monsoon was good, above average last year. Also, the inflation trajectory on the right hand side, the inflation trajectory is now becoming benign. Typically, this is again a very important chart, last 20-22 years of data. If you look at the consumption, overall consumption growth in India, which is basically the left hand side chart, and the right hand side chart is the government transfers, basically the government related consumption spending, which includes, multiple schemes which are there both for state governments as well as central government. I think there is a very high degree of correlation. If you look at FY 2008 to 2014, the overall consumption growth was high in India, and a big driver was again the higher fiscal transfer or the higher government related consumption related spending overall. These two charts are basically one, the left hand side is basically US consumption trends and the right hand side is India. US recovered within 2 years of COVID, and the big part of that was again they announced stimulus package, which was called as stimulus and relief package, and because of that the consumption trend recovered there faster. India is still below the pre-COVID trend. Chart on the right hand side. Now, coming to what is happening, again from an urban point of view, this is something which we all know. I mean, recent budget announced, basically 1 lakh crore of tax foregone from the government side. Again, this is close to around 4 to 5%, across the categories of tax savings, which is good for consumption. This is the chart which I was talking about. This is the welfare spending number which I was talking about. Almost close to around 3 lakh. Now that number has increased. During the time when we made this presentation, the number was close to around 3 lakh crore. Now this number has inched up to close to around 3.5 lakh crore, because almost every state getting into election, before the state elections, we are seeing a trend in which some of these, welfare spending program, especially for women, are getting announced by the state government. And all put together, the number is pretty big, around 3 lakh to now around 3.5 lakh odd crore, which is a big number in my view, and this will, over a period of time, will help the mass consumption to come back. Also from some of the data points point of view, if you look at the rural wage part, I think there is some bit of recovery, although the number is still, not very encouraging. The left hand side top chart, but I think there are at least from the chart we can figure out that it has at least bottomed out. Still, it is a kind of monitorable, and why I am showing you this data is because the rural wage growth has a very high correlation with the consumption patterns in India, especially the mass consumption. Rural growth, I talked about, there has been a recovery in the last couple of quarters. Urban should see a recovery going forward because of what happened in the budget and some of these welfare schemes. Now, we all talk about K-shaped recovery. I think this is a very fundamental data which we have presented, which talks about why India is looking at the K-shaped recovery. Basically, we all talked about the premiumization and the mass end struggling. I think one of the reasons was that in the last few years, MSMEs have not done well. While if you look at the right-hand side chart, the GVA has grown, but the growth rate of MSMEs have been lower compared to the GDP growth, and probably that is a segment which employs or which is a labor-intensive segment, and hence the lower end of the jobs or the low-skilled jobs, that has seen some bit of deceleration in terms of the growth, which is also one of the reasons why this kind of a K-shaped recovery is playing out. So broadly, till now what we presented, and I was intentionally kind of going through some of these charts and data points in a faster way. Don't want to be kind of holding you back. But if you look at what we presented, the problem was mass end of the consumption, and there is a welfare spending part which has come in the last 6 months in a big way. Inflation trend is coming down, and also we have seen a better monsoon last year, which will also help the inflation and will help the agri part of the economy. So rural part of the consumption is now looking almost on track. Last 2 quarters it has recovered and it is in the positive territory and is doing well. I think what is ailing the consumption today was basically the urban part of the consumption. And we believe that with the income tax benefits, even urban part of the consumption should come back. And government spending on infrastructure, etc., also kind of got derailed because of the election year. I think that is also coming back. So we will see, in the next 1 year, we will see consumption kind of coming back in a decent way, which has struggled in the last 2 years. Now coming to valuations, obviously, some of these companies, because the fundamentals were not supporting, some of these companies have the valuations have come down and are now, they have become reasonable. The average valuation is now close to around, 5-year average. We all know the quality of companies who operate in the overall, consumption area, whether it is consumption staples or whether it is consumer staples or consumer discretionary durables. I think the quality of companies and the overall balance sheet, return on equities, etc., they are class apart. I think the corporate governance wise also, if I look at across the spectrum, consumption sector stands out. With valuations getting now reasonable and multiple tailwinds, coming into play, we believe that this is the right time to look at the sector from a again from a medium-term point of view. This is again the call that this is the right time to look at the sector from a 2 to 3 years point of view. This is our fund. So one of the unique part of our fund is that we have within all the consumption sector, sub-sectors, we have removed some of the cyclical part of the consumption sector. So for example, in our fund we don't have power or realty, which are part of the consumption index overall, or automobiles also, because we believe that some of these sectors are cyclical in nature. Over the last 20 years, they have seen cyclical trends in terms of the earnings of the sector. So the sector presents a kind of a bouquet, or presents a kind of subsectors which are more non-cyclical, or where the earnings are more stable and more secular in nature. I think these are some of the risks which are, again, the usual risk. I think the overall growth, etc., kind of coming down. Higher inflation is clearly a risk for the sector. To sum it up, I think, broadly, that is the last slide. I think to sum it up, overall, we are talking about a sector which has given us multiple compounding stories. I think the kind of compounders which this sector, overall consumption, both consumption staples as well as consumption discretionaries and durables, which have given to us, is kind of highest across other sectors, and there are multiple long-term drivers, which we talked about earlier during the presentation, which are into play, and next 10 years are looking good for overall consumption as a sector. The sector has, the fund and the sector has a stable earning profile. The return on equity, etc., are very, very healthy. Near-term factors which we talked about are, again, some of the macroeconomic related data like inflation coming down, increase in welfare spending, monsoons again being good, and we are seeing recovery in rural consumption, and some of the risks which we have presented, which I talked about. So I end the presentation out here. So